A bitter November wind rattled the frosted windows of Martha's diner, but inside, the scent of fresh drip coffee and old leather booths offered a warm refuge, until a single text message froze Evelyn's heart. It was 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. The first heavy sleet of the season was coming down hard, coating the quiet Midwestern streets in a slick, icy glaze that signaled the undeniable approach of Thanksgiving. Inside the aging establishment, the ambient noise was a comforting symphony that contrasted with the bitter chill outdoors. There was the constant clinking of heavy ceramic mugs, the satisfying sizzle of bacon on a flat-top grill, and the gentle, overlapping hum of small talk among the local regulars. It was the kind of neighborhood place where waitresses in comfortable shoes still called everyone "hon" and "sweetheart," automatically pouring bottomless cups of dark roast without ever needing to be asked. Tucked away in their favorite corner booth, 35-year-old Evelyn sat across from her 4-year-old daughter, Chloe. Evelyn wore a faded, oversized wool sweater that had seen better days, her auburn hair pulled back into a simple, practical knot. To anyone passing by, she looked perfectly ordinary, just another hardworking single mother enjoying a quiet weekend morning. Across the scuffed laminate table, little Chloe was happily swinging her legs, completely absorbed in coloring a bright purple turkey on her paper placemat. Her deeply loved, worn-out stuffed bunny rested safely right beside her plate of half-eaten buttermilk pancakes. Evelyn reached into her unassuming canvas purse and pulled out a crisp $20 bill. She carefully folded it in half and tucked it neatly under her empty coffee mug. It was an incredibly generous tip for a $15 breakfast, but Evelyn always made sure to quietly take care of the hardworking people in her community. A moment later, an elderly woman in a flour-dusted apron shuffled over to the booth, carrying a stack of slightly crumpled envelopes in her weathered hands. It was Martha, the dedicated owner who had poured her entire life into keeping the diner afloat. "Evelyn, sweetheart, I truly hate to bother you on your only day off," Martha said, her voice laced with exhaustion and a distinct hint of embarrassment. "But this new Medicare letter just came in the mail, and I can't make heads or tails of these new deductibles. Joe and I are terrified we filled out the forms wrong." Evelyn offered a warm, highly reassuring smile, immediately sliding her empty plate aside to make room for the paperwork. "It's absolutely no bother at all, Martha. Please, sit down and let me take a look." For the next 10 minutes, Evelyn patiently read through the dense, confusing medical insurance documents. She carefully broke down the complex bureaucratic jargon into simple, comforting terms, explaining exactly what the elderly couple needed to do. Her voice was remarkably steady and gentle. It was a small, effortless act of patience, yet it quietly echoed a much larger, completely selfless act of charity from her past, one that had miraculously altered the course of her life when she helped a stranger in a snowstorm years ago. She simply pointed to the dotted line, assured Martha that her medical coverage was perfectly secure, and handed the papers back. "You and Joe have nothing to worry about," she promised softly. Just as Martha walked away, visibly relieved and thanking her profusely, Evelyn's cell phone buzzed sharply against the tabletop. The screen lit up with a group message notification. It was from her older brother, Marcus. The topic was her father Walter's upcoming 70th birthday dinner, an extravagant, highly anticipated affair planned for that very evening at the Brass Lantern, the most exclusive and expensive steakhouse in the county. Evelyn unlocked her phone, her eyes scanning the bright screen. The message was perfectly typed, completely devoid of any familial warmth. Just a final reminder for tonight's reservation, Marcus had written to the extended family group. The venue requires strict formal attire. Also, as previously discussed, this is strictly adults only. No kids. Don't bother coming if you can't figure out a sitter. The words felt like a physical, heavy blow to her chest. The "no kids" rule wasn't a general policy applied to a sprawling family. Evelyn was the only one with a young child. It was a targeted, deliberate exclusion, thinly wrapped in the polite guise of event planning. Before she could even process the familiar sting of the group text, her phone vibrated once again. This time, It was a private, direct message from Marcus. "Don't use the kid as an excuse just because you can't afford a nice dress or a nanny," the follow-up text read, dripping with casual cruelty. "Dad wants a sophisticated evening. Try not to embarrass us if you do show up." Evelyn slowly set the phone face down on the table. The warmth of the diner suddenly felt entirely inadequate against the chilling realization settling deep in her heart. Her biological family wasn't just asking for a quiet, adult-only evening, they were actively trying to erase her and Chloe from their pristine, high-society image. Because Evelyn drove a rusted Chevy, lived in a modest apartment, and dressed for comfort rather than status, her parents and brother had simply assumed she was a miserable financial failure. They viewed her single motherhood as a tragic mistake that somehow stained the family's upper-class reputation. They had absolutely no idea about the massive state fund she managed, nor the immense power she wielded in the capital. They only saw the faded sweater and the old car. The profound unfairness of their blind judgment threatened to bring tears to her eyes. She had spent years biting her tongue, quietly enduring their sneers and their thinly veiled pity, all to maintain some fragile semblance of family peace. "Mommy, look!" Chloe suddenly cheered, breaking the heavy silence. She proudly held up her paper placemat. The turkey was now a chaotic, joyful masterpiece of purple and green crayon. "He's wearing a sweater just like yours." Evelyn blinked back the sudden moisture in her eyes, instantly burying her deep emotional ache beneath a radiant, fiercely protective smile. She reached across the table and gently smoothed her daughter's soft hair. "It's beautiful, baby," she whispered, her voice completely steady and full of boundless love. "It's the best drawing I've ever seen." She would not let Marcus's toxic arrogance or her father's shallow vanity ruin this peaceful Saturday morning. They had made their choice, and the message was painfully, irrevocably clear. There was no room at their grand table for a woman they deemed worthless and a child they viewed as an inconvenience. But Evelyn was not a victim. Looking down at her innocent daughter's joyful smile, Evelyn makes a quiet, ironclad promise: if her own family refuses to celebrate them, she knows exactly who will. Before we see what Evelyn decides to do next, I want to take a quick moment to thank you for being here with us. If you are still watching this video and your heart goes out to Evelyn and sweet little Chloe, please drop the number 8 in the comments below just to let me know you're here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I highly recommend hitting that subscribe button and turning on the notification bell so you never miss a single moment of these incredible journeys. Your wonderful support is what helps us keep creating this heartwarming content to inform, uplift, and inspire you every single day. Now, let's get back to the story and find out exactly who Evelyn is about to call. Let's continue. The private phone line in the governor's mansion rarely rang on a Saturday morning, but Governor Thomas Sterling had a strict personal rule: he always answered when the caller ID said Evelyn. Miles away from the bustling political center of the state capital, Evelyn stood quietly by the frosted window of her small, meticulously organized apartment in Oak Creek. The comforting scent of warm cinnamon oatmeal wafted from the tiny kitchen, mingling with the soft, inviting glow of a yellow reading lamp in the corner of the living room. Her home was a true haven of absolute peace, decorated not with expensive, flashy art, but with framed photographs and Chloe's vibrant, colorful drawings proudly pinned to the refrigerator door. As Evelyn watched the thick, heavy snowflakes drift down from the pale Midwestern sky, her mind briefly wandered to another freezing blizzard, exactly 5 years prior. She had been a struggling young mother back then, desperately trying to stretch her last few dollars while filling up her rusty sedan. While stopping at a desolate gas station, she had noticed an older man shivering violently near a stalled vehicle, hopelessly exposed to the biting, relentless winter wind. Without a single second of hesitation, Evelyn had walked over, handed him her only sturdy umbrella, and bought him a large, steaming cup of dark roast coffee from the convenience store. She hadn't asked for his name, nor had she expected any form of repayment or praise. She simply saw a human being in need and offered a basic, unconditional kindness. It was only weeks later, after receiving a beautifully handwritten thank you note, that she realized the stranded stranger was Thomas Sterling, the soon-to-be governor of Wisconsin. That single, unassuming cup of coffee had forged an unbreakable bond, built entirely on profound mutual respect rather than political leverage or wealth. The sharp, sudden ringing of her kitchen landline pulled her out of the nostalgic reverie. Evelyn walked over and picked up the receiver, already knowing exactly who would be on the other end. Evelyn. It was her mother, Dorothy. Her voice was thin, laced with a familiar, nervous guilt that always accompanied her pathetic attempts to keep the peace at the direct expense of her daughter's feelings. I wanted to call and apologize for Marcus's group text earlier. You know how your brother gets when he's stressed about planning an event. Evelyn leaned gently against the kitchen counter, keeping her tone perfectly level and calm. He was very clear, Mom. He told me not to bother showing up. Well, he shouldn't have worded it so harshly, Dorothy stammered, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation. But honey, you really need to try to see it from your father's perspective. It's his 70th birthday. He invited all his senior partners from the firm, the country club members, everyone who matters in town. It's supposed to be a highly sophisticated, adult evening. Having a toddler running around, it would just be a distraction. And frankly, Walter feels your current situation might bring down the mood. He doesn't want to spend the entire night explaining to his wealthy friends why you haven't settled down or found a better-paying job. The quiet, devastating cruelty of Dorothy's words hung heavily in the warm air of the apartment. Her mother wasn't just defending the no kids rule, she was openly admitting that they viewed Evelyn's entire existence as an embarrassing, miserable failure. They assumed she was still struggling to make ends meet, completely ignorant of the fact that she was now one of the top-tier policy advisors in the entire state. I understand perfectly, Mom, Evelyn said softly, entirely refusing to raise her voice or offer them the dramatic satisfaction of an argument. I won't be attending. Please wish Dad a happy birthday for me. She gently placed the receiver back on the cradle, effectively ending the conversation with her dignity entirely intact. She wasn't going to sit at home and cry. Taking a deep, fortifying breath, Evelyn pulled her cell phone from her pocket and dialed a private, unlisted number. Evelyn. To what do I owe the absolute pleasure on this snowy weekend? Governor Sterling's voice boomed through the small speaker, radiating a genuine, fatherly warmth that her own flesh and blood severely lacked. Good morning, Thomas, she smiled, feeling her heavy heart lifting almost instantly. I was wondering if you and your lovely wife might be free for dinner tonight. I recently received the official paperwork for the new $40 million education initiative, and I'd love to celebrate the appointment with my chosen family. For you and my beautiful goddaughter? I'll cancel everything right now, the governor replied without a fraction of hesitation. Where are we going? The Brass Lantern, Evelyn stated smoothly. 7 o'clock. After hanging up with the governor, Evelyn made one final, crucial phone call. She dialed the direct executive line for Julian, the polished and highly respected owner of the Brass Lantern. A few years ago, Evelyn had quietly pulled some strings and offered extensive, unpaid tutoring to help Julian's teenage son secure a highly competitive state scholarship. Because of that anonymous generosity, Julian treated her with the utmost reverence. Miss Evelyn, it is always a profound honor to hear from you, Julian answered, his professional tone dropping into a respectful, warm hush. Good morning, Julian. I need to book the private VIP alcove for tonight at exactly 7 o'clock, she requested politely. It will be a party of 4. Julian paused, the faint sound of flipping reservation pages echoing through the line. Consider it done, ma'am. However, I must discreetly mention that we have a very large, incredibly demanding party booked right in the center of the main dining room at that exact time. The Walter family. They can be quite vocal. I want to ensure your evening is completely undisturbed. A calm, undeniable sense of quiet power settled over Evelyn. I am well aware of that party, Julian. I simply ask that you keep the carved wooden screens to the alcove completely drawn. I require absolute privacy until I give you a specific signal. Understood perfectly, ma'am. I will personally oversee your table. Evelyn ended the call and looked back toward the living room, where little Chloe was happily playing with her bunny on the rug. The pieces were now flawlessly set in motion. Two drastically different dinners were now set for the exact same hour, under the same luxurious roof, and the storm was coming in more ways than one. The brass lantern stood like a glowing, golden beacon against the harsh Wisconsin winter, its frosted, heavy glass doors hiding a collision course decades in the making. At exactly 7 o'clock, a sleek, black town car pulled up to the discreet side entrance of the prestigious steakhouse. The bitter cold whipped at the tailored wool coats of the arriving patrons, but the moment Governor Thomas Sterling opened the heavy mahogany door for Evelyn and little Chloe, they were enveloped in absolute, luxurious warmth. The air inside the elite establishment was instantly intoxicating, thick with the mouth-watering aroma of seared ribeye steaks, roasted garlic, and sweet melted butter. Soft, rhythmic jazz played smoothly from hidden, high-fidelity speakers, perfectly complementing the sophisticated, low hum of wealthy patrons enjoying their expensive Saturday evening. Rich, dark mahogany wood panels lined the immaculate walls, and the ambient lighting was kept intentionally dim and romantic, reflecting off hundreds of pristine, crystal wine glasses resting on crisp, snow-white tablecloths. Julian, the impeccably dressed and highly professional owner, was waiting in the private, velvet-lined vestibule to greet them personally. With a deep, respectful bow to the governor and a genuinely warm, deeply appreciative smile for Evelyn, he quietly escorted the trio through the bustling, spotless commercial kitchen. Chloe's large, innocent eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated fascination as she watched the towering chefs in their tall white hats expertly flipping thick cuts of meat over open, roaring flames. She clutched her deeply loved, worn-out stuffed bunny tightly against her chest, her favorite, simple velvet Sunday dress swishing softly as she walked. That modest, deeply cherished little dress was a stark, undeniable contrast to her Uncle Marcus's strict, obsessive insistence on purchasing expensive, formal designer attire for every single family occasion. Looking at her daughter's joyful, radiant face in the warm kitchen light, Evelyn knew in her heart that true class, dignity, and elegance could never simply be bought with a platinum credit card in a high-end department store. They finally reached the raised VIP alcove, an exclusive, incredibly private section of the dining room partially obscured by a beautifully carved, intricate wooden screen. From this elevated, shadowy vantage point, Evelyn had a perfect, completely unobstructed view of the sprawling main dining floor below, yet she remained entirely hidden from the prying eyes of the public. Exactly 15 minutes later, the heavy brass front doors of the restaurant swung open to reveal Walter's highly anticipated party. The arrival of Evelyn's biological family was absolutely impossible to miss. They were incredibly loud, demanding immediate, undivided attention, and deeply ostentatious as they strutted confidently toward the massive, round center table explicitly reserved for the 70th birthday celebration. Walter, wearing an overly expensive, flashy custom-tailored suit, immediately held court at the head of the table, barking rapid-fire orders at the highly trained service staff before he had even fully taken his seat. Marcus was right beside him, completely lacking any basic restaurant etiquette as he snapped his fingers loudly and aggressively in the air to summon a passing waiter, loudly demanding the establishment's absolute most expensive bottles of vintage red wine without even glancing at the wine list. From the quiet, secure safety of the VIP alcove, Evelyn watched the chaotic, embarrassing spectacle unfold in total silence. She gently cut up a plate of high-end, perfectly breaded chicken tenders for Chloe, ensuring the sweet little girl was happily occupied and completely shielded from the toxic, arrogant display happening below them. As the first round of expensive vintage wine was heavily poured into the crystal glasses, Evelyn watched her father confidently stand up and tap his glass with a heavy silver spoon, aggressively demanding absolute silence from his country club friends, business partners, and extended family for his grand birthday toast. Walter's deep, booming voice carried effortlessly across the elegant room. He thanked his wealthy peers for attending, boasted endlessly about his corporate firm's recent, highly lucrative financial quarters, and then, inevitably and cruelly, the conversation turned to his absentee daughter. Evelyn's stomach tightened into a painful knot. She listened in stunned silence as her own father openly lamented to his elite guests about his disappointing child, painting a tragic, entirely false picture of a woman who couldn't even manage her messy, failed life well enough to attend his milestone birthday dinner. Walter's loud, disparaging remarks about Evelyn being a heavy, embarrassing burden to the family name echoed slightly in the quiet dining room, cementing his utter lack of unconditional love and respect for his own child. The cruel words stung sharply, threatening to reopen deep, thoroughly familiar emotional wounds from her youth. But before the sharp pain could truly settle in her heart, Governor Sterling shifted in his plush leather chair. He reached across the small table and placed a large, remarkably fatherly, and fiercely reassuring hand firmly over Evelyn's trembling fingers. He offered her a steady, deeply grounding, and immensely proud smile. Leaning in close, he softly reminded her of the brilliant, completely independent, and highly successful woman she had become. He specifically mentioned the massive, $40 million state education fund she had just successfully secured for the children of Wisconsin through her sheer, unmatched intellect and tireless hard work. He quietly reminded her that she was highly respected, deeply valued, and profoundly loved by those who truly mattered in this world. Evelyn took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the last lingering remnants of her childhood insecurity completely evaporate into the jazz-filled air. She was no longer the frightened, judged daughter seeking scraps of toxic, conditional approval from a man who only valued money and status. She was a powerhouse, a devoted mother, and a completely self-made woman standing on the precipice of her greatest triumph. Julian steps into the shadows of the VIP alcove with a knowing, polite smile, leaning down to ask Evelyn a very simple question. "Is it time, ma'am?" Before we witness the moment Evelyn finally steps out of the shadows, I want to pause and thank you for being here with us. If you are still watching and feeling the incredible anticipation of this scene, please leave the number 1 in the comments below to let me know you're still here with us. I also warmly invite you to leave a meaningful comment or a kind wish for Evelyn and sweet little Chloe. And if you haven't joined our community yet, I highly encourage you to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of these powerful stories. Your wonderful support is what helps us continue creating this beautiful, inspiring content for you. Now, let's get back to the restaurant and see what happens next. Let's continue. Evelyn nodded once, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement that signaled the absolute end of her silence, and the beginning of her family's long overdue reckoning. Julian stepped back from the edge of their private table with a courteous, deferential bow, seamlessly melting into the dimly lit, sophisticated background of the bustling steakhouse. The antique grandfather clock stationed near the grand hostess stand indicated it was exactly 7:45 in the evening. As if operating on an invisible, perfectly choreographed cue, the soft ambient lighting of the expansive dining room dimmed just a fraction over the general seating area. The subtle shift was masterful, naturally and effortlessly drawing every patron's eye away from their sizzling cuts of prime beef and toward the spacious center floor. The constant clinking of heavy silver cutlery against expensive porcelain, along with the low, sophisticated hum of Saturday night conversations, organically tapered off into a hushed, deeply respectful expectancy. The soft jazz playing through the hidden speakers seemed to fade, leaving a heavy, anticipatory quiet in its wake. Julian's smooth, professionally modulated voice drifted gently from the high-fidelity sound system nestled within the rich mahogany walls. He warmly welcomed everyone to the establishment, expressing his gratitude for their patronage on such a bitterly cold Wisconsin night, and then politely asked for a brief moment of their evening to officially acknowledge the presence of a highly distinguished guest who had chosen to dine in Oak Creek. Down at the sprawling, obnoxiously loud center table, Walter immediately straightened his rigid posture, proudly puffing out his chest. He shot a knowing, immensely arrogant glance at his wealthy corporate peers and country club friends, adjusting the silk lapels of his expensive custom suit. He fully expected the impending announcement to somehow validate his lavish, high-society gathering, perhaps assuming a local politician or a prominent CEO had arrived specifically to pay respects to his milestone 70th birthday. Beside him, Marcus quickly wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and eagerly surveyed the room, his eyes darting around the elegant space, practically salivating at the desperate thought of rubbing shoulders with the political elite. Back in the quiet, secure shadows of the raised VIP alcove, Evelyn stood up gracefully from her plush leather chair. As she prepared to finally step into the light, the painful memory of her older brother cruelly scoffing at her rusted, worn-out Chevy briefly crossed her mind. That sharp, lingering sting of unearned judgment was instantly, beautifully eclipsed by the sheer, undeniable power radiating from the governor of Wisconsin standing right beside her. Governor Thomas Sterling gently lifted little Chloe into his strong, capable arms. The sweet 4-year-old rested her head comfortably against his tailored shoulder, safely clutching her worn stuffed bunny, completely unbothered by the growing silence of the massive room. With a reassuring, fiercely protective nod to Evelyn, the governor stepped out from the shadowy privacy of the intricately carved wooden screen. Evelyn stepped out flawlessly right beside him, walking tall, beautifully poised, and moving with an innate, quiet elegance that no amount of inherited wealth could ever replicate. As they descended the short, carpeted staircase together, heads across the dining room immediately began to turn. Excited whispers quickly rippled through the luxurious space as the affluent patrons instantly recognized the highest-ranking official in the entire state. The governor gracefully took the center floor, his booming, deeply charismatic voice projecting effortlessly, commanding absolute attention without ever needing a microphone. He didn't simply offer a standard, generic political greeting to the local voters. Instead, he immediately and passionately honored the incredible woman standing quietly beside him. With absolute, unwavering pride, Thomas Sterling introduced Evelyn to the entire captivated restaurant as his most trusted, exceptionally brilliant senior policy advisor. He spoke warmly of her flawless intellect, her tireless dedication to the Midwestern community, and formally credited her as the sole, mastermind architect behind the state's massive, newly approved $40 million education initiative. To finalize the stunning, deeply moving introduction, he affectionately pressed a gentle kiss to Chloe's forehead, proudly referring to the sweet little girl in the simple velvet dress as his beloved goddaughter and the absolute light of his life. Down at the 70th birthday celebration, the color completely and instantly drained from Walter's aged face, leaving him a sickly, pale shade of white. His hand trembled so violently that his heavy, crystal wine glass slipped clumsily from his loose grip. It shattered sharply against the thick wooden table edge, spilling a wide, dark pool of deep red vintage wine across the crisp, pristine white tablecloth like a rapidly spreading stain of guilt. Dorothy gasped loudly, pressing both of her manicured hands over her mouth in sheer horror, while Marcus sat completely frozen in his chair in utterly humiliating, wide-eyed disbelief. The realization hit the entire biological family like a devastating, high-speed freight train. The very high society peers Walter had spent his entire life trying to impress were now looking at Evelyn with immense, unadulterated awe and respect. The humble, quiet single mother they had explicitly and cruelly banned from their table for being a tragic, embarrassing failure was, in fact, the most distinguished, powerful, and highly respected guest in the entire room. Evelyn didn't gloat, nor did she offer a petty, vindictive smirk. She simply stood in her quiet, breathtaking dignity, completely secure in her immense worth and deeply insulated by the unconditional love of her chosen family. The polite, admiring applause of the restaurant slowly fades as Governor Sterling turns his steely gaze directly to Walter's messy table and begins walking slowly toward them. The heavy silence that fell over Walter's grand birthday table was so profound, one could almost hear the sharp Wisconsin wind howling against the frosted glass outside. Every single patron in the normally bustling, sophisticated dining room of the Brass Lantern was now watching the scene unfold with bated breath. The remnants of an incredibly expensive, hollow celebration sat embarrassingly before Evelyn's biological family. Half-eaten cuts of prime steak grew cold on their porcelain plates, and the dark pool of spilled vintage wine continued to slowly soak into the crisp white tablecloth, dripping steadily onto the polished hardwood floor. Walter, a man who had spent his entire adult life meticulously cultivating an intimidating aura of absolute authority and high society perfection, looked entirely stripped of his pride. He sat rigid in his expensive custom suit, his jaw tight, his eyes darting frantically between the imposing figure of the governor and the quiet, breathtaking dignity of his supposedly failed daughter. Governor Thomas Sterling stopped right at the edge of the sprawling, chaotic table. He did not raise his voice, nor did he display any outward aggression, but his commanding presence demanded absolute respect. Little Chloe, entirely unaware of the immense social tension radiating from her biological grandparents, simply rested her sleepy head against the governor's tailored shoulder, happily clutching her worn stuffed bunny. Walter's earlier boastful toast about desiring a highly sophisticated, exclusively adult evening was completely turned upside down. In a room filled with millionaires, corporate executives, and political elites, a sweet, 4-year-old child in a simple velvet dress had effortlessly become the most profoundly respected and fiercely protected person at his grand party. "Mr. Walter," Governor Sterling began, his deeply charismatic voice laced with a polite yet unbreakable steel. "I sincerely wish you a very happy 70th birthday. It is certainly a remarkable milestone. However, I must admit that I personally cannot fathom celebrating such a monumental occasion without the warm presence of my entire family. Especially a beautiful, innocent blessing like little Chloe." The subtle, sharp reprimand hung heavily in the air. Walter opened his mouth to speak, but his usually booming voice failed him entirely. Beside him, Marcus's face flushed a deep, humiliating shade of crimson. Panicking under the intense, judging weight of the governor's gaze and the surrounding country club peers, Marcus foolishly attempted to nervous justify their cruel, exclusionary invitation. "Governor Sterling, sir, it's just a massive misunderstanding," Marcus stammered, his hands visibly shaking as he aggressively adjusted his silk tie. "We only wanted an elegant evening for Dad. Evelyn, well, she drives that rusted, broken-down old Chevy. We constantly see her eating breakfast at that cheap, run-down diner on the edge of town instead of taking care of her appearance. We honestly just assumed she was struggling financially. We thought she wouldn't be able to afford a babysitter or proper formal attire. We didn't want her to feel embarrassed or out of place." Evelyn stepped forward, her posture perfectly straight. She did not yell, she did not hurl bitter insults, and she completely refused to let her brother's shallow, incredibly toxic prejudice break her composure. "I don't need expensive designer clothes, a luxury vehicle, or an exclusive country club membership to validate my worth as a human being, Marcus," Evelyn replied, her voice remarkably calm and wonderfully steady. "I drive an old car and wear comfortable sweaters because I am deeply practical. I joyfully eat at Martha's Diner because I respect hardworking people who actually treat others with unconditional kindness. Instead of wasting my money trying to frantically impress people who constantly judge me, I choose to invest my 6-figure salary entirely into Chloe's future and into helping my local community." Marcus swallowed hard, his weak defense completely crumbling under the sheer, undeniable weight of her quiet confidence. Evelyn slowly reached into her simple, understated canvas handbag. Moving with deliberate, elegant grace, she pulled out 2 thick, cream-colored envelopes and placed them gently onto the center of the messy, wine-stained table. "This first envelope," Evelyn explained softly, tapping the heavy parchment paper, "contains my official, long-term state appointment letter. I am now overseeing the distribution of $40 million in crucial educational funding. The second envelope is a highly lucrative consulting contract with the largest policy firm in the Midwest. I built a massive, successful empire from the ground up, all while you and Dad were busy pretending I didn't even exist." Dorothy, who had been sitting in paralyzed, horrified silence, finally let out a soft, broken sob. The undeniable reality of how horribly she had treated her own flesh and blood finally shattered her fragile illusions of high society perfection. She tearfully reached out her trembling, manicured hand across the table, desperately wanting to touch her daughter's arm. "We didn't know," Evelyn, Dorothy whispered brokenly, hot tears ruining her expensive makeup. "Oh, my sweet girl, we just didn't know." Evelyn looked down at her weeping mother. There was no intense malice in her eyes, only the fierce, unyielding boundary of a mother fiercely protecting her own child from toxic behavior. Evelyn softly but firmly replies, "You never asked, Mom. You just assumed, and you judged." Without waiting for a hollow apology they aren't truly ready to give, Evelyn turns her back on the table, leaving her father staring in stunned silence at the paperwork that proved exactly how profoundly wrong he had been. The bitter Wisconsin cold bit at Evelyn's cheeks as she finally walked out of the steakhouse doors, but for the first time in years, she felt completely, wonderfully warm inside. The simple, unconditional act of kindness she had shown a freezing stranger in a raging snowstorm years ago had miraculously brought her full circle. It had granted her the profound respect, the fiercely protective chosen family, and the undeniable validation she had always quietly deserved. But true to her gentle, deeply compassionate nature, Evelyn did not let the stunning events of that Saturday night harden her heart into bitter resentment. When her parents desperately reached out early Monday morning, begging for a private conversation away from the prying eyes of their country club peers, she agreed to meet them at a quiet, neutral coffee shop halfway across town. Walter had looked entirely unrecognizable that crisp Monday morning. Stripped of his intimidating custom suits and his booming, authoritative bravado, he was just an aging father carrying the crushing weight of his own monumental mistakes. Beside him, Dorothy had kept her hands tightly clasped around a paper cup, her eyes red and swollen from days of quiet crying. Over 2 untouched cups of black coffee, Walter had offered a genuine, emotionally raw apology. He openly admitted that his suffocating vanity and his intense fear of high society judgment had completely blinded him to the incredible, resilient woman his daughter had become. Dorothy had wept quietly, realizing with devastating clarity that her obsession with appearances had cost her the precious, irreplaceable early years of her only granddaughter's life. Evelyn listened patiently, but she did not offer the instant, easy forgiveness they might have expected in the past. Instead, she laid down clear, unbreakable boundaries. She offered them a cautious trial period, making it perfectly clear that a place in little Chloe's life had to be consistently earned through genuine respect, not simply demanded by blood relation. Now, it was Thursday morning, and the golden, pale sunlight of Thanksgiving Day was pouring through the frost-rimmed windows of Evelyn's modest apartment. The cozy space was a sensory haven of classic Midwestern holiday traditions. The rich, mouth-watering aroma of a slow-roasting turkey mingled beautifully with the sweet, spicy scent of cinnamon sticks, bubbling cranberry sauce, and fresh pine needles from a small wreath hanging on the door. In the background, the cheerful, brassy marching bands of the annual holiday parade played softly on the small television screen, providing a comforting soundtrack to the peaceful morning. Chloe was sitting happily on the braided living room rug, her little legs crossed as she gently fed imaginary pieces of toast to her beloved, flop-eared stuffed bunny. A soft, noticeably hesitant knock sounded at the front door. Evelyn took a deep, steadying breath, wiping her hands on her cotton kitchen apron before walking over to turn the heavy brass deadbolt. When she pulled the door open, Walter and Dorothy were standing in the chilly hallway. They weren't holding expensive, flashy presents from luxury boutiques, nor were they wearing the intimidating, high-society attire they usually favored. Instead, Dorothy wore a simple, unbranded wool coat, and Walter held a humble, homemade pecan pie wrapped carefully in tin foil. The grand, boastful patriarch of the Walter family looked incredibly nervous and remarkably hopeful, entirely stripped of his usual demanding presence. Evelyn stepped aside with a soft smile, silently inviting them into the warmth of her home. As they took off their winter coats, Walter cleared his throat, his eyes respectfully scanning the modest but deeply loving environment. He turned to Evelyn, his expression incredibly earnest. "Evelyn," he began softly, his voice trembling slightly. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said at the restaurant. Specifically about Martha's Diner." He paused, taking a shaky breath. I was entirely wrong to judge you for spending your time in a place like that. You were right, true wealth is found in community and how we treat one another. I actually drove past the diner yesterday just to see it. I know I have over 40 years of corporate accounting experience, and I was wondering, if you think they would allow it, I would very much like to volunteer my time to help the elderly owners sort through their complicated taxes and Medicare paperwork. It's a small gesture, but it's the least I can do to start giving back to the community the way you always have. Evelyn felt a genuine, deeply moving swell of emotion rise in her chest. It was a profound, undeniable olive branch. Her father was not just apologizing with empty words, he was actively willing to step out of his elitist bubble and learn the quiet grace of serving others. It was the absolute clearest proof of a genuine change of heart. Before Evelyn could respond, Walter slowly turned his attention to the living room. He saw his 4-year-old granddaughter watching them with wide, curious eyes. A man who had once demanded absolute, terrifying authority from everyone in his corporate boardroom now gently lowered himself down onto one knee on the worn apartment rug. He didn't rush forward, and he didn't raise his voice. He offered a warm, incredibly tender smile, waiting patiently for Chloe to feel safe in his presence. "Hello there, sweetheart," Walter whispered gently, his voice thick with emotion and his eyes crinkling with unshed tears. "I'm your grandfather. I was wondering, if it isn't too much trouble, might I have the great honor of meeting your very special bunny?" As Chloe shyly hands her grandfather the bunny, Evelyn smiles, realizing that while blind judgment can easily break a family apart, unconditional kindness has the miraculous power to heal it. The comforting warmth of Thanksgiving filled Evelyn's modest home. The shattered pieces of a fractured family were slowly mended, not by wealth or high society status, but by the quiet, undeniable power of forgiveness. It serves as a beautiful, timeless reminder that when we choose to strip away our harsh judgments and look past the superficial, we open the door to true, unconditional compassion. Just like a single, sturdy umbrella offered to a stranger in a bitter snowstorm, a simple act of selfless kindness always has a miraculous way of finding its way back to us. Let us all take a moment to look at the people in our own lives, remembering that the greatest treasures and the most remarkable souls are often found in the most unassuming packages. Writing Evelyn's journey was a deeply emotional experience for me, because it highlights a universal truth we too often forget. We are so quick to judge the cover of a book that we completely miss the beautiful story inside. Evelyn's quiet strength and her father's ultimate, tearful humility remind us that it is never too late to change, to apologize, and to rebuild the family we truly deserve. If Evelyn's story resonated with your heart today, I would love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a moment where a simple act of kindness changed everything, or a time when someone proved your initial judgments wrong? Please share your beautiful stories in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you believe in the power of second chances, standing up for what's right, and the sweet justice of life, please consider subscribing to Retribution Raw. Join our growing community of listeners who appreciate the deep, raw, and beautiful truths of family and humanity. Hit that subscribe button, leave a like to spread the warmth, and let's keep sharing stories that truly matter.